I would like to call the Records Commission meeting to order. First up, we have approval of the minutes.
Do you want a roll call?
Or, yes, roll call, I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry. Mrs. Dillon?
Here.
Mr. Burchett?
Here.
Mrs. Williams?
Here.
Mr. Davis?
Here. The first item on the agenda is approval of minutes, the Records Commission meeting minutes from January 14, 2025. After reviewing, can I have a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll move for approval.
Do we have a second?
I second it.
And then Annetta would have to abstain since she was not here. So we need somebody else to second.
Okay. So Don, you'll second?
Yes, second.
Okay.
You need a roll call for that?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Burchett?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Mrs. Dillon?
Yes.
Okay, first item of business that we have is the 2025 Records Retention Schedule, RC2 review.
So on the RC2, I'm just, some changes were made by Kim Wallace. I'm going to have her just speak to those changes. And then just to go ahead real quick, on the RC3 that was uploaded was missing a couple pages, so I reprinted out the revised RC3 that we'll be approving, and I gave those copies to you, so we'll be switching those out of the packet. But I wanted her to go through those changes with you also.
Okay, so Kim, you'll be addressing A and B?
Yes,
Okay.
the RC2, we added electronic to the media type because everything was paper, and now we're going to electronic because we have Laserfish. So we thought that was pretty necessary to put that on there for paper along with electronic. And I also checked with Brittany, and she said for HR 9 and HR 10, she wants to change it to 5-year and 9-year. It was at 3-year for both of those. And also HR 10 was only electronic, and she said that sometimes she does have paper, so we added that on there as well. And those were the only changes that we made to the RC2s.
Okay. Any comments from the panel? Okay.
The RC3s is cleaning out the archive personnel files. As you know, full-time is 20 years, part-time is 10 years, and seasonal is 5. So I always make a list at the bottom of who we are going to destroy, so that if someone comes to me and says, or Brittany comes to her and says, have you deleted this file, we can always go back through our RC3 and see exactly who we destroyed. So it's just our destruction for last year, 2024.
Any other items to discuss on the RC3, Kim? Okay.
Do you have any questions for me?
No. Thank you.
I think we need a vote for the RC2 and the RC3, so
Okay.
you can sign those.
All right. Can they be done together? Or
We should do them individually.
Individually?
I would make a motion that we go ahead and approve the RC2 so that can be signed and sent out.
Okay. You heard the motion. Is there a second?
A second.
Can you do a roll call?
Yep. Mrs. Williams?
Yes.
Mrs. Dillon?
Yes.
Mr. Burchett?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Then I make a motion that the RC3 be approved so it can be signed and sent up as well.
You heard the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Do we have a roll call?
Mrs. Dillon?
Yes.
Mr. Burchett?
Yes.
Mrs. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes. Thank you, Martina.
Sure.
Item C, Fire Division Public Records Request Process regarding protected health information. Deputy Chief?
Good morning.
Good morning.
My question involves when we try to fulfill records requests, a lot of them involve protected health information. Currently, we do not have a way to encrypt those files to send them through email. which causes us to delay the process of fulfilling these requests and also taking up more man hours processing these in paper, requesting self-addressed stamped envelopes, or picking up in person. So my question is there gonna be an ability at some point to do encrypted fulfillment of these documents? Or are we gonna continue, just so I can let people know as they come in and as these requests come in?
I can answer that. So currently, we are in the process of looking at a new solution, which will allow us to update our Office 365 licensing to provide better security as well as the encrypted of the emails. But this is a citywide investment, not just a individual like persons. So we're not quite that far yet into the process. We're waiting to get cost, but we are looking into that. So we're just stuck with a timetable on that.
Aaron, is it an item that would be budgeted and ability to be accomplished this year? Or would it be
I don't
2026?
know if we have enough budget this year in order to do that. We are looking. We may have to slide some things around. Remember how we were talking, or Todd was talking to you the other day about the company that we're trying to navigate around?
Yes.
Part of it's all tied up with that. So we are looking into a solution. It's just not there yet.
Okay, thank you.
So DC, it sounds like it's something that they're considering, and if we can do it across the board for the city, then it would give you that opportunity. Martina, as the law director, do you have any thoughts on our
Yeah, I
ability to
was,
do that?
when I saw this on the agenda, I did a little research looking into that. So what I would suggest is when you get to the point where you're talking to a provider about that, I would specifically recommend discussing with them the fact that we have record requests that contain PHI, and we want to make sure we're HIPAA compliant because there are HIPAA compliant regulations with respect to that. So I
Okay.
think it's a good idea to make sure we have a provider that is familiar with those regulations, because you do have to make sure there are certain notifications, retention. You want to make sure that it's encrypted all through the process. And for example, and I don't claim to be an expert on this, but one of the things I saw was that as that email's floating, it may hit servers in between. So you want to make sure that during the whole process, it's encrypted and the PHI is protected, because there are some civil and criminal penalties that can apply if you violate that. So I would make sure that whoever you're dealing with on that has experience and is familiar with those requirements, so we make sure we don't run afoul of the HIPAA regulations.
Now, one other thing I just thought of is we could right now use Laserfiche, which is HIPAA compliant, DoD, all that other kind of stuff, to upload the record to Laserfiche and then send a direct link to an email via Laserfiche, password protected, all that kind of stuff. So we could do that now. It's just the process is a little bit more cumbersome than just replying back to an email.
Martina, you had mentioned the retention. Is retention, because of the HIPAA compliance, would the email retention for that be different than other emails?
Yeah, and I didn't get into the weeds of that. I just know it exists, so we'd have to look further once we get to
Okay.
that point. There's also regulations about, getting the person you're sending to on the other end, getting their permission to send it via email. So you want to make sure you follow the whole process all the way through and I would want something in writing from them, and there are some examples about how you go about that. So when we get to that point, I would suggest we all sit down and make sure we're all on the same page with the provider about, look, how's this going to be done? We want to make sure we're HIPAA compliant and from beginning to end, getting the person's authority,
Confirmation that they're
making
allowed
sure
it.
it's, and then making sure it actually goes to the person it's intended to. For example, they recommend, double checking, triple checking the email address before you send it. Don't just type in the email address and ship it off and then oops. It's one of those things where I type in the first 2 letters of your name and I've got 5 contacts that have that same, and then you accidentally send it to the wrong person because you don't triple check that you're sending it to the correct. So maybe they also recommend having policies in place and perhaps having only 1 or 2 people who send those emails, so that they're familiar with the procedures that have to be followed. Otherwise, if you're delegating that to somebody who doesn't do it on a regular basis, they may not be as
More likely
familiar with
for an
those
error.
policies, and you're increasing your chances of violating it. So, I think it can be done. I just want to make sure that the company we're working with is aware of and can assist, making sure we're in compliance.
Okay. Do you see, are some other area jurisdictions doing this? Do you happen to know?
The only one I'm familiar with is kind of the solution that Aaron came up with. It's an end-to-end encryption through Microsoft 365.
Okay.
That when you encrypt it, you send it to the receiver, they have to create a login to an encrypted server, I guess it would be. And then when they log into that encrypted server, that's where the document lives, and that's where they
Okay.
can retrieve it from. It's not as simple as an email attachment. They have to put credentials in to log into another location.
That was another thing that was mentioned, is that when you send an email with an attachment, you also have to make sure the attachment is itself encrypted. So it was just, as I started reading, and I don't claim to be an expert, but as I started reading, it's like, wow, there are a lot of hoops you have to jump through to make sure that's HIPAA compliant.
That it's protected?
Yeah.
Okay, and then DC, another question would be, currently in fire, even though we're handling it differently, not electronically, is it assigned to one or two staff people only?
I'm
to
the only
handle
one who
those
currently
requests?
handles the requests.
You're the only one?
Yes.
Okay,
And
and I
the
assume
chief
that
if
would
I'm
be the
not
case
available.
moving forward?
Yes.
Okay.
I can send the information to DC and Aaron, and I
Yeah,
can
that'd be
copy
great.
you, Mike, that I pulled off on this.
Okay.
That might be a little helpful, maybe as a starter, that you can use when you're talking to these companies to make
Yeah, I
sure
was gonna say, I
that
think
we're
it'd
checking
be
the boxes.
helpful to Aaron and Todd.
Yeah.
To make sure that whoever they're looking to work with would be able to.
Because I got the impression there are certain companies who are very familiar with this and specialize in this, and there are other companies who do not. That's why I'm sort of harping on that aspect
Okay.
of it.
Are there any other questions from the commission for Deputy Chief? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
The next item is D, video record preparation cost recovery. Chief,
Good morning.
good morning.
So a few weeks ago, the state created a law that allows for municipalities to charge up to $75 an hour, $750 max, for anyone requesting video, body cam or cruiser cam video. And they did that because there's been this, over the last few years, there's been this onslaught of journalists, media journalists that post police videos on YouTube, and they're generating income, making money from it. But it creates a substantial burden on us because we have to watch the video in real time and go through and redact all the CJIS information and protected information. So we came up with, after the state passed the law, we came up with a policy that we would like to implement locally at the police department that allows us to charge the $75. And the state law allows us to actually create an estimate of what that video is going to cost the requester, and then give them the estimate before we actually have to fulfill that. So we would get a request, we would give them the estimate of what it would be, and then send that estimate to them, and they can choose whether they want to actually request to get that video or not. And that would be in compliance with state law. Sent my draft of my policy to Martina. I think she was good with it. She just wanted the Records Commission to hear the issue and vote on that.
You have more than one staff member has to be involved in that process as well, is that correct, Chief?
Right now, we have two, generally Sean and Alexa,
Yeah.
but they have to watch the video in real. So if you have, hypothetically, traffic stop, 15-minute traffic stop, you've got 15 minutes of video. Someone has to watch the video in real time and then edit out, redact out the private information, and then has to watch it again to make sure that they didn't miss anything and that those redactions actually stuck and went through. So a 15-minute video is at least 30, if not longer, period of time for them to actually do this. And we've had people request it, and then when we then not want it later. So we're doing the work ahead of time, and it's become a burden. So
It's exhausting staff time. And then this is familiar with some neighboring jurisdictions. I know you worked with most of the other police chiefs in the area, correct?
yeah, so I think the TCSU chiefs wanted to have substantially similar policies, in place, just so that our region kind of had the same response to video journalists. So this is substantially similar to Kettering's, is what. And there's some of the other cities have tweaks, some minor tweaks here or there, but for the most part, it follows state law verbatim.
And then what I suggested to Chief was that the commission vote on this, and then if approved, then I could draft up a resolution for the council meeting tomorrow and have council adopt it. Since it's dealing with charging the public, I thought that would be a better protection for the city in case anybody were ever to challenge the policy. We at least have council authorization on record via resolution.
So would our vote be to support moving it to council, or is it just supporting?
Supporting the
Just how it
policy
would
and then
work.
moving it forward to council.
Okay. All right.
So, and I would make that motion.
All right. You heard the motion from the law director. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We do a roll call, Karen?
Mr. Burchett?
Yes.
Mrs. Williams?
Yes.
Mrs. Dillon?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Can I ask a question real quick? The payments for that, does that go through does that go through public records?
So
Or-
we usually answer all of our public records requests, and if we've got another public records request that would cost money, they generally pay us, and then we forward it to finance. So I wrote the policy that they would pay us, so that way we know we got it, and then we would forward that to finance. So,
I have a question. Well, about how many of those requests do we get, like a year?
we were, so once, we didn't get a lot at first. I think they just kind of missed us, and they were hitting some of the larger agencies around us. So once those larger agencies started kind of fighting back with the $75, then we started getting more. I bet we got 5 or 6 this month. So
Have you, from talking to the other TCSU chiefs, have those requests gone down since they implemented this fee?
So they're in the same process as us. So some of
so
them
they haven't
some of them went just
implemented yet.
wrote the policy and they implemented it without any kind of resolutions. And some of them are taking it through their city council. Some of their law directors wrote it and it's going
Yeah.
through their city councils now. So everyone assumes that they'll drop off to almost nothing. So
Okay.
thank you.
Any other questions for the chief?
We had a RC2 change. I didn't know if it made the deadline or not.
Did not.
So we need to do it next time.
Next time, yeah.
Okay.
With the public records manual being reviewed, we're going to have several meetings throughout the year.
Yeah.
So we'll do the next time. There was a page missing, and then there was another complication, so we just couldn't get it through in time for me to put it through on this agenda.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, chief. All right, the next item on the agenda is the records manual review, proposed revisions, part 1.
So what I done is I included, and it's in the packet, is a memorandum to the Records Commission, basically explaining how I thought this might be the most effective way to go about this, rather than taking the entire manual at once, which would probably be here a while. I thought maybe I'd just section it off into 3 sections, so perhaps maybe 3 meetings, I'm thinking, to get through this entire manual. So what I've done is included the first section, which goes through the heading of records inventory. And then if we're able to get through and approve the revisions of this section, then I would move on to the second section. So what I thought I might do is just start and briefly cover the revisions I made to this section, and then if anybody has any questions, we can go through those as well. So what Karen did was attach, I believe the first attachment is my revisions. Strike-throughs are in, or deletions are in strike-through, and additions are in bold. And then the current version is attached in case you want to refer to that. So starting with that, the first thing is Appendix A, but that should actually be at the end, so I'm just going to skip over that. And then you have the cover page. We'll add the city logo back on there. And then you'll see the cover page also says approved by the Records Commission. June 10, 2020 is stricken through, obviously, because when this entire records manual is eventually voted for approval, then whatever that date is, I'll add that date in there. On page 2, there were some quotes from James Madison, the Ohio Supreme Court, the ORC. While I think that is nice to have in there, I don't think it's necessary. I haven't seen those in any other records manual that I've looked at. I don't disagree with any of it. It's just that my goal was to sort of pare this down as much as possible and make it as concise as possible. So that's why I suggested just striking out those quotes, because it's basically, the sentiment expressed by those quotes are contained in the policy itself. So I didn't feel the need to have that continue in there. I highlighted the next on page 3 and 4 is the table of contents. I believe I highlighted that. I haven't made any revisions to that yet, because obviously that won't be done until we've already gone through the entire manual and made revisions, and I know what's going to be on what page. So when that's done and I'm able to figure out what is where, then I'll make revisions to that.
Okay.
And then moving on to page 5, what I did was I just struck out that first sentence that describes why record keeping is important and added a summary of that. Basically acknowledging the importance of maintaining the records and the fact that we have records retention schedules in place, and that the mediums that those records are identified on, paper, computer, film, et cetera, and that the records maintained by the city and the ability to access them is important in order to maintain trust. So basically, I felt that was a better representation of those two sentences that are struck out there. I reworded the elements of an effective records management system, including the following. And this I referred to the Ohio Historical Society. They have a similar designation, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in theirs. So I just clarified that a little bit. The next paragraph down where it begins the first step toward an effective records management, I just made some, what I think are self-explanatory additions in bold and deletions in strike through, just for clarification purposes. And that carries over into the second paragraph, which says the records officer will complete a records inventory. Just making additions and deletions that I thought just clarified that. I will note the second, this is the question I wanted to ask, in the second from last paragraph there on page 5, where it says, the last sentence, the records officer will also be responsible for the release of public records to the clerk of council or other official as established by city ordinance. Quite honestly, I wasn't quite sure what that meant. So if somebody has experience with that, I didn't know if that meant when a public records request comes in, the records officer of each department will release the records for release to the requester through the clerk of council. So if somebody has any information, I don't know, Laura, do you have any? Okay. And I know
that-
Karen hasn't been here long enough maybe to, I don't know.
I do know that some departments send them to me to send out.
Okay,
And that's one of the things you and I were going to meet
Yep.
about too, because there's, public records officer is defined differently in their ordinance, and then they seem to be subdivided by departments. So we probably need to look at that before you before you complete this paragraph.
okay,
So if you can leave that one up for debate.
discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And if anything, I mean, there isn't one records officer, right? So we should probably put the word department,
yeah, because,
and then like you guys will have the discussion on which departments need to go through the clerk and maybe which ones don't because of
There's a
maybe
public
like
records
fire
officer
talked
for each
about,
department.
HIPAA or other.
right, I guess that's why I highlighted that for my purposes, is because I wanted to make sure that whatever sentence we have there, it accurately reflects what is actually happening, and not a sentence that really is not congruent with actual practice. So I can leave that alone for now.
Okay.
And then I struck out the last sentence there on page 5, just because I felt it was a little, duplicative to what had already been said. So I felt with what had already been said, that really didn't need to be in there anymore. Does anybody have any questions or concerns with, maybe I'll just go page by page, and then if anybody has any questions or concerns about what I've done there, just let me know.
Sounds great.
Could I say? one-
Yep.
On the page, first of all, with all the quotes and everything, maybe on that page, just kind of introduce the book as, not the Reader's Digest version, but it kind of is, of the Ohio Historical Connection thing. And then also, maybe when this is republished and sent out to all the departments, maybe we say this is attached, is also the Ohio History Connection Manual, so they have it to look at. Since, that has more information, more defined information, is that a possibility?
I'm fine with including, so on this page where the quotes are, what do you want to do with that?
Just maybe put a full, kind of like an introduction paragraph in your introduction, just stating that, this is a condensed version of the Ohio History Connection version, and then maybe that'll be attached also? Or are you trying to replace completely the Ohio History Connection? Because I was confused when I first came in January, how this was taking place.
I think what the intent was to revise this, to update it, not to supplant it with the Ohio History Connection. I don't have a problem with including the Ohio History Connection as an appendix and just indicating maybe on this page where the quotes are, that is attached as a reference model. If there are additional questions, they can refer to that, but also if they have questions, they should also refer to the law department or the clerk.
Okay.
So,
The introduction on 5 kind of, wouldn't that,
yeah, I think the introduction on
Covers what
5
you would want
is
on
pretty
2.
good.
yeah.
So what I can do is, instead of maybe including an introduction paragraph, because that's on really the first page of 5,
Yep.
is the way I'm reading that, is somewhere in here, just refer or make a reference that the Ohio History Connection is attached as appendix whatever. And then they can use that as an additional resource. And then if they don't find what they're looking for there, they can always consult the law department or the clerk. So I think that might be the better way to do it.
I can see that being confusing to departments if you have both pieces of
That's-
information. If you have both documents,
Yeah.
I can see that being confusing.
Yeah.
We won't be able to hear you if you don't come up to the microphone. So,
So why don't we do this? Oh, I could make a reference to the Ohio History Connection, the website. That might be a little less confusing.
That would be my vote.
Yes.
Does the commission have, I mean, I can understand Laura's point. If somebody gets something this thick, they're like, ugh, and maybe not look at it. So I guess I think I agree that maybe including a reference to the
Reference to
Ohio
the
History
site.
Connection website somewhere in here. Would be a good idea.
Okay.
So I made a note of that. And then if we move on to page 6, the definition of a record, I double-checked, that definition is still consistent with Ohio law. Sometimes those ORC, as you know, the legislature sometimes revises those, but that's still good. The second paragraph on page 6, I struck out the sentence, "The Ohio Revised Code mentions records more than 200 times, and annual court decisions impact the interpretation of these statutes." That just seemed a little superfluous to me. It's good information, but I don't think it's necessarily needed in here.
Yeah.
Moving on to the 3-prong test for record, that is still consistent with Ohio law. I did add in the first bullet point a reference to electronic and in parentheses, including email. Because I think it's important for people I hope people realize that your email can be a public record, even if it's your personal email, if you're discussing city business. So, for example, if, you receive an email from a citizen asking a question about the rec center, then, and you respond back, that's a public record.
Is that, and maybe I'm even outlined it, but would that be applicable for social media posts and things that are
Right.
also about
Exactly.
city business?
Because
Martina?
there is a line that says basically your social media, even if it's your personal social media, if you're on there chit-chatting back and forth about public business, that can be a public record. So you got to look at it, see what the context and the content of it is, and then that determines if it's a public record. And if it is, then it's subject to the retention periods, the RC2s.
Okay.
And if the RC2 does not address social media, then you have to keep it forever until the RC2 is amended to say, okay, for social media posts, you have to keep it this amount of time.
And that responsibility would fall on the person, if it was their personal social media, that retention
say that
would
would
fall
fall
on
on-
them. It wouldn't
yeah.
fall on a city employee to retain it if they,
If it's their personal, if it's their personal account, then I would say they bear responsibility
okay.
for that. So, and that might be something we want to make a note to take a look at, is reviewing the RC2s to see if they address social media posts. Because if they don't, then we probably want to amend those RC2s to address the length of period social media needs to be kept.
Martina, I have that on our city social
Do
media.
you have that? Okay.
But when you were
On the
talking about.
cities.
But when you're talking about the public, like, for
Yep.
example, how does the Moraine Community Connection work? Because there's a lot of chatter back and forth between council members and residents and things like that. How would that, and then also that page is managed by Mike.
Yeah, so what we would need to do is, I think we need to have a discussion about that, because that's not a city-operated social media post, correct?
Correct, but they are
So-
talking about city
Yeah,
business.
exactly. So
Yeah.
I think it's important to have a discussion about, look, if you're discussing city business, that can be a public record, so you're going to have to maintain those records for whatever the period is.
Okay.
So, that's a good point. I mean, because a lot of people don't think about that. They think, oh, it's a social media post, but,
Well, and the responsibility would fall on them because it was a personal.
because it's a personal, yeah, I mean,
Right.
from my perspective, the responsibility falls on city or city social media that we have, that the
Right.
city has. Now, your own personal Facebook or whatever, you're going to have to be aware of the fact that you need to retain that, because the city is not going to have control over my personal Facebook page to do that. So,
Okay.
and I definitely think that's a discussion we need to have.
And there are some training, there is training out there online.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You know, I've taken several classes on it through Archive Social.
Yep.
And places, so we might want to address that at some point, to have every public records, well, actually, everybody kind of go to a link and just watch it, and maybe check off on a paper that they've all seen it and all understand what the concept is, because it is getting more litigious out here.
Right. Can you
people do.
send me that information, Karen?
Yep.
Because what I'll do is I'll review it first,
Okay.
and then we can
See if
follow
it's
up with
valid
having,
for
yeah.
us or not, yeah.
I'd like to
We don't
review
want
it too. Yeah,
misleading,
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So if you could email that to me, Karen,
All right,
I'd
thank-
appreciate it.
Mhm.
And then the last item under that three-prong test, where I have a deletion where it says again a yes, I just revised that to read, if the answer to all three of the above questions is yes, then the document is a public record. So I just thought that clarified it a little more. The last paragraph, again, I just made changes that I felt were clarification changes, made it a little easier to read. And then the last sentence, this is what I think I was referring to earlier, says if there is any confusion as to whether an item meets the definition of a record, consult with the city's law department. It's read before, err on the side of caution and treat the item as a public record. I think it's better that if you have a question, you go to the law department, which is me now, but in the future, that may be somebody else, So go to that person and figure out whether or not this is actually a record right before it gets destroyed.
Okay.
On the next page, the record series, I don't think I did anything because that made sense. On the council, board, or commission member volunteer records, Again, I just made very few revisions to that to clarify that, make it easier to read. And then at the bottom paragraph, I wanted to clarify the penalties for improper disposition of a record. So I clarified by stating improper disposition of a record could result in litigation, which could result in the government body having to pay litigation expenses, statutory damages in the maximum amount of $10,000, as well as the payment of attorney fees, which is what the Public Records Act says. And basically, that last sentence I reworded to just say, therefore, council and board or commission members should consult with the clerk of council to ensure proper retention and destruction of records in accordance with the law, because earlier it says the clerk is basically in charge of the council and board records. She's essentially the records clerk, so that's why I referred them to the clerk of council on that one. On page 8, the records inventory, essentially what I did with this is, this policy kept referring to a quote-unquote quick inventory, which I didn't see that anymore in the Ohio History Connection. So I deleted the references to that and included the information that I reviewed from the Ohio Historical Connection. So I basically took the information from the Ohio Historical Connection on records inventory and implanted that information into here. Again, I think this makes it a little easier to read and consistent with the law as well. One question I had is throughout this, and this is down at the bottom under annual due date, I had a question as to whether or not, it seemed to me from our prior meeting that city staff liked having those due dates in there. So I just wanted to follow up and get everybody's opinion on the due dates in here. Right now, this is talking about the annual due date for the records inventory, and I changed it to read, it is recommended updates to the records inventory series, or to the record series inventories be submitted to the clerk of council by the first Friday in August. Which the first Friday in August is the same, I did not change that. The way it read before was that annual updates to the quick records inventories are due in the clerk's office. I changed it to it is recommended because, I mean, if somebody wanted to do an update, they wouldn't have to necessarily wait until August to do it. If they felt it needed to be made soon, they could make it sooner and we could have a records commission meeting. Well, I don't think we'd need a records commission meeting for that, but they could do it sooner if they felt the need to do it. I just don't see the need to say, well, that has to be done in August. But you guys deal with it on a daily basis. I don't. You see how it works. So I wanted to get thoughts on that, if anything.
Karen, do you have any insight or thoughts on it?
As far as due dates throughout this section, it's like RC1s are due annually by such and such Friday in May. The RC3s, I think that anything should be able to be brought within that year at any meeting without having a due date, because maybe it's not, you don't want to go, you purge your records in October. Are you really going to bring something back in a couple months? If you miss the October deadline, then you might want to go ahead and bring it. So I don't think there should be limits or due dates, just as long as it's done within a calendar year, honestly.
So something that reads, it's recommended that updates to the record series inventories be reviewed and updated annually.
Yes, I like that, but.
I think that was put in, Martina, when we were trying to follow along the destruction dates.
Okay.
So that's why those due dates are in there, so then that way everybody would have an opportunity to say, here's my updated stuff. And then
okay.
we do the destruction.
Got you. So is that still applicable, or would it still be all right, do you think, to say, look, it's recommended you review these and update them annually if needed?
I mean, in the last couple of years, we hadn't done a destruction, so I don't know how to answer that question, but I do think that having the destruction dates in there as identified
Yeah.
that would be helpful, but if somebody makes a change to their RC2 or RC3, I don't think that that's a due date necessarily, but
So for this one right here, for the record series inventories, we could keep that as basically saying it's recommended you do that on an annual basis
basis.
without a specific date. But when we get into the RC 1s, 2s, and 3s, keep those dates?
I don't think those dates need to be kept. Because it's saying that you can bring an RC1, RC2, but you can't bring an RC3. Like RC2s are due by, RC3s are due by. To me, there's no reason why you can't address both at any time, at any meeting that we have scheduled. And right now, we don't even have a good set destruction date right now, as far as, are we going to try to add it to the public shredding event and do it at that time? Or are we going to bring a truck in here,
Right.
separate from that? So, if maybe we could have a little more time on that one. I just don't see putting the
Okay.
date, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm coming in here. If you guys like getting this stuff to me by May such and such, that's fine. If you want to get the stuff, but I think it should be allowed to do whenever you want.
Can't be heard from the back row. So I think when we were, sorry, excuse me. So I think when we were first looking at the dates and implementing it, it was trying to create a workflow situation. I think that's why each one of those steps had a different date to give time for it to be brought forward and reviewed. I think that having a recommended date target-wise is good just to keep a flow, but if we're changing the policy to be whatever, I would just hate for it to be like, here's an annual requirement, and then all of a sudden you get the 1s, 2s, 3s all at that annual date as opposed to a flow. So I think the dates, at the time, were just to create some type of a flow.
Do you have a preference one way or another?
An alert or an alarm, really.
I mean, because you've dealt with it, you've been here, 20
Yeah.
years, so you've dealt with these records, so I don't know what your opinion is.
I am familiar with a flow,
Okay.
whether it has a hard date or a recommended date or whatever, that is irrelevant, I think. But I think there just needs to be some type of a flow so that you're not expecting it all at the same time. And I'm familiar with things happening at different stages of time, so.
So maybe a recommended date, maybe not a shall date, but it's
Yeah.
a recommended that you get this document in by this date.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's just what we're familiar with.
Yeah.
So almost as worded, Martina. It is
Yeah.
is recommended updates.
Recommended by, yeah.
Are you talking about the RC2s and 3s there, or are you talking about just?
No,
the-
I'm just talking about what we have on
Yeah.
here on page 8, because I haven't
Okay.
gotten to the RCs yet.
Okay,
This is,
all right.
this is the updates to the record
Yeah,
series
if you guys
inventories.
want a deadline, that's fine.
All right, so right now, we'll just leave it
Just leave
as
it.
it is, which
Yep.
it says, it is recommended updates to the record series inventories to be submitted to the clerk of council by the first Friday in August. That way, if they get it there in June or May or whenever, it's still there.
Yeah.
And that's the last I had for the Part 1 revisions. So what I'll do is I will go back and make a reference to the OHC website. I will leave open the sentence on page 5 we discussed about the records officer being responsible for the release of public records.
Yeah.
Karen's going to send me information on social media posts, and we can look at that and discuss that for the next meeting. And then if anybody has, before the next meeting, if anybody has any questions or concerns about this part, we can discuss them at the next meeting. And then what I'll intend to do for the next meeting is have the second section revised for review for that meeting as well.
Okay.
So we can just sort of do it as a flow, so that if we do something in section 2 that impacts section 1, we can go back and take a look at that before voting on it. My goal was to sort of have this, as, like I said, as a fluid revision process, and then when we get down to having had reviewed 1, 2, and 3 sections, then at that point, we can schedule a meeting and say, okay, these are the final revisions, and we're going to vote on it on this date. That way, everybody knows when we're going to vote on it, and they can take one last look to see if they have any concerns about anything, if that's agreeable.
And these revisions, once voted on and approved, do they end there, or is this something council has to have input
I
on?
believe, from my memory, I think it's been taken to council. I'll double check, but I believe it's
Okay.
been approved by council via resolution, but I'll double check on that, Mike.
Okay. Are there any questions to the law director on the review of proposed revisions, part one? Hearing none. The next item on the agenda is other business. Does any commission member or audience member have any concerns or questions or comments? Hearing none, we'll close other business. Last item that we have is adjournment.
I'll move to adjourn.
We'll move to adjourn at 10:46. Is there a second?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. Dillon?
Yes.
Mr. Burchett?
Yes.
Mrs. Williams?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.